Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jonathan Chapman with AE Solutions. Today, we're presenting a tale of two DCS credits, which, if you don't know, ties into a white paper case study. One other thing to mention is we will also be having a live Q&A at the end of the presentation, so feel free to enter your questions at any time during it. All right, allow me to briefly introduce our speaker for today, Keith Brumbaugh. Keith is a SysFel principal specialist at AE Solutions and has over 20 years of industry experience. Keith gave a similar presentation at this year's Mary Kay O'Connor Safety and Risk Conference, and we're representing it today so it can be seen mostly by a wider audience. With that, I will just hand it over to Keith.
All righty, thank you, Jonathan. And yeah, this paper I did present at the A&M conference. It's got a few updates in it, so if you have seen it before, it is just a little bit different near the end. So again, thanks for joining me today. So quick overview of what I'll be presenting. First, I'm going to go over a recent job where we tried to solve a common problem in the industry today. We're going to look at how to justify taking 2 credits on one LOPA scenario. But just a note for this particular case study, the 2 credits took the form of two initiating cause frequency of 1 in 100. And we will also review the requirements and problems with claiming multiple DCS credits. A couple key takeaways I hope to give you with this presentation is a method to use your qualitative judgment to support your quantitative analysis. Namely, we'll lay the framework for you to take not just a 1 in 100 DCS initiating cause frequency credit, but we'll look at, you can apply this to other gray areas such as LOPA, trying to take multiple DCS credits or multiple human IPLs, human reliability analysis, prior use justification, user-defined failure rates. So we'll show you that these techniques can be used to justify a lot of your data collection efforts and put your plant history to good use, whether you have a lot of data or a little bit. So for this case study, the client wanted us to help them justify taking a DCS initiating cause frequency of 1 in 100 failures per year. The failure for this particular scenario, it involved the DCS controlled sequence where during an important step, valves could be left in the wrong position when they transition to the next step of the process, resulting in the hazard. The team felt that their system was better than the standard 1 in 10 per year limitation that you typically have. This system had been designed to eliminate almost all potential failure modes by design. For instance, they had valves with a fail last design where there's dual solenoids, and you had to both energize one and de-energize the other solenoid at the same time in order to make the valve move. And these were, like I say, fail last. Also, any erratic DCS output that may have occurred or interruption in utilities would have a very hard time making the valves move unintended. Also, they had the safeguards that would be expected, including high pressure interlocks. And lastly, this system had no history of failure in the last 25 years. They didn't want to put an SIS in. Typically, you'd look at an SIS in these cases, but this client was concerned that adding a new SIS would actually add new hazards that they didn't have previously. Since this was a DCS sequence, the SIS would have to do a lot of handshaking, and they were worried about new hazards coming with that. Also, if they put new valves in, they introduced the possibility of new spurious trips where the valves open or close when they don't want them to, and that could introduce a hazard as well. And then also there was a commercial concern. There's a cost to putting an SIS in, operating, maintaining, purchasing. So we reviewed it with the team, and it did sound feasible. They could get to the 1 in 100 year initiating cause frequency, but we did need to prove it. So a lot of people probably had some warning bells going off so far of calling BPCS initiating cause at 1 in 100 per year. That's normally not allowed. Of course, the first issue is almost all client standards say your BPCS initiating cause can only be 1 in 10 per year. And then this is normally backed up by industry guidance, such as ISA 61511 or CCPS or other standards books. They all say pretty much that your BPCS initiator should not go over 1 in 10 per year. So to get around this, basically if we wanted to satisfy the client standard and take a 1 in 100, there was no there was no method to do this approved in their standard. What they did have, though, was a deviation form, which would allow us to take this as long as we filled out the deviation form they needed. The form needed a documented proof, though, of the justification, and we'll go over that in the next few slides. The other issue, of course, is the standards. So just to note, first off, the 61511 standard, if you remember, this client didn't have an SIS, so they technically weren't operating under the standards requirements, but that's kind of a weak defense. So we wanted to do our due diligence. So we looked for maybe a few other clauses that we might be able to loosely apply. Looking through the standard, the one that looked most appropriate was one where it allows a 1 in 100 BPCS initiating cause and a 0.1 probability of failure BPCS independent protection layer on the same scenario, as long as you have sufficient independence. And there's a lot more to it than that in the standard, but in essence, this system was operating in that sort of manner. The valves, as I said, it was a step transition, so the valves could initiate the hazard by being in the wrong position during the step transition, but they also had safeguards in place, multiple interlocks backing up that initial failure for protection. If you look in the standard, it has a number of different requirements that you need to fulfill, and one of those includes a quantitative analysis, which we'll get into. So ultimately, like I said, the client wasn't following the standard necessarily on this particular scenario, but they were deviating from the standard. But just to stress, you shouldn't deviate from any standard without a justifiable a way to justify that. So what our analysis sought to do was keep with the intent of the standard, which they want you to account for your systematic errors, make sure you properly reduce these to support your numbers, and the paper goes into a lot more detail on the clauses, requirements, and intents. But basically, the standard required a data analysis and a confidence statement to back up that data. So we'll go into how we did that next. So for the data, again, we're trying to prove here a initiating cause frequency. So we needed a way to quantify what the actual initiating cause frequency was based on our team's assumptions. So best way to do that is with a failure mode and effect analysis. The FMEA for short. The FMEA provided us with a number based on the system itself. So we could examine each potential mode of failure, list out all the effects and all the protections available for the different failures. And it's very similar to a LOPA, but it's focused on one system. It includes as many systematic failure modes as we could think of, including human errors in programming or commissioning errors and so on, as well as your typical electronics failures. So once you get this number, though, do you know if you can trust the result? So it is it's a good number and it's based on reality, but that's kind of where your confidence assessment comes in, as we'll discuss next. And let's see, I think I have a little laser pointer here. So this, I'll go into this graph here in a second. So at the moment, like I said, the 61511 standard, it implies a failure rate number without any statement of confidence to back it up is basically meaningless. Again, we're doing initiating cause frequency, but you can apply some of these approaches. So the standard suggests two methods to determine your confidence. First one, there's a frequentist method. For that, you'd basically need to generate a maximum likelihood estimate to determine your confidence, and you convert it using a chi-squared distribution. Something to note with this is whatever number you're trying to prove, you're going to need about 10 times more data collected than your target. The other method they propose is a Bayesian method, and this approach requires only you make a prior statement and then back that up with evidence. And with the Bayesian approach, the accuracy is very dependent on your prior, and it gets better as you collect more data and plug that evidence in. And both different forms of frequentist or the Bayesian, they're both calculations have their own merit. Both are based on distributions, and so now we'll kind of go into this picture. So this would apply to either approach. This is directly from the standard, showing an example of like a SIF. What confidence you might assign to a hypothetical SIF. So in their example, they were trying to show a SIL2 SIF, and as you can see here, whatever this particular system was, as is typical, the higher reliability you place on this, or the higher SIL level you place on this, the lower your confidence goes. So your SIF may operate in a SIL3 range, but there's very low confidence on that. SIL4, I mean, as you see here, they say 12%. That seems reasonable. That's very unlikely. Whereas the opposite, if your SIL2 SIF, you think, is this operating at a SIL1 level? Well, of course it would be. So that's got a very high confidence of 96%. But anyway, this is just an example from the standard, and involving a probability of failure here. Oh, one other thing to mention: the standard discusses there's 3 different levels of confidence that are good targets, but for probabilities, it doesn't necessarily require you to meet anything. Now, for hardware failures, it does, but for probabilities, it suggests a median is probably your minimum target. That's about a 50% confidence in a number, whereas a 90%, that's a very high confidence. And again, failure rate data, they want you to at least be 70% confident. Okay, let me go next. All right, so with that in mind, what our team decided to do was take the Bayesian approach, as it was most suited for this study. As I previously noted, the frequentist approach would require about 10 times more data than the target. So given our target was 1 in 100 years, and there's no comparable system in existence, we would need to collect about 1,000 years worth of data before we can make a confidence statement using the frequentist method. So obviously that's not practical. Whereas now our Bayes approach, this would supply the necessary quantitative method to make our confidence statement. We can make it on our 1 in 100 years. All we needed to do was generate a prior and then update that prior with some evidence. The good thing about the Bayesian approach is the distribution. You can calculate it. You can calculate your confidence from all the evidence you gather. We'll go into that in a second here. This may sound a little bit complicated if you've never worked with distributions. It does sound complicated. But if you compare it to the maximum likelihood estimate of a frequentist approach, where you just have all your data and divide by number of samples, or sorry, a number of failures, that's pretty straightforward. But something that should be obvious is the time it would take to learn these distributions and figure out Bayesian math is a lot less than collecting 1,000 years worth of data. So there's a bunch of good approaches out there. The one we chose for our study was the NIST's 2 data point method. And I've got some references in the paper if you care to read further into it. So what this method says is you pick a distribution which best represents your system. So since we were working in frequency, the inverse of that being mean time between failure, the best model for that would be a gamma distribution. And the nice thing is you can do all of this in Microsoft Excel. So to generate that data, to generate your gamma distribution, which is your prior, you need 2 data points. These data points are known as alpha and beta. You assign a confidence to those 2 data points. The way this works is, in essence, you pick 2 numbers you're willing to make a bet upon. For example, if we talk football, you may place 19-to-1 odds on your favorite college team beating a local high school team. But then if you flip that around and say, what if the college team plays the NFL, you may flip that around and say, now it's only 1 in 10 odds that they'll beat that NFL team. Yeah. So once you continuing that example, say you fix the number scaling, you generate your prior using those 2 data points. Then you want to see how good your prior actually was. So now you would have your college team actually play against the NFL and then measure that result. So if your college team won or lost, you'll plug that result into your model, and now you'll have an updated confidence number an updated confidence on your college team actually beating the NFL. And as should be obvious, the more times you have them play, the better your confidence in where they really lay, or where your college team is gets better and better. And you'll be surprised at how quickly you can get to a believable result with minimum data, but you do need a strong prior for that. So back into our case study. So yes, we use the, and I'll go into this graph here in a second. For the case study, the 2 numbers we needed to form the prior were kept pretty simple. For the alpha parameter, we used the simplest number we knew, which is the 1 in 10 per year failure for BPCS. That's such a well-known number in the industry that we felt very confident applying a 95% confidence to that number. For the beta, that was a little more tricky. For that one, we used the result from our FMEA that I discussed earlier. This gave us a good informed prior based on the team's best judgment. The beta initial confidence, though, was a little more tricky to determine. We were choosing between basically that 50 and 70% number that I referenced a little earlier that 61511 talks about. So both numbers are listed in the standard, but for initiating cause frequencies, there are no requirements telling you what confidence you need in the data. So we felt, given how much confidence the team placed in the system, we felt that the 50% coin flip, that'd be too low. So what we did, we went ahead and chose the 70% since the team was very confident in their system, and we felt the FMEA we did was very solid. And so when you plug that into Excel, this is a graph straight from Excel. This is the result we got. So let's see. So this is similar in form to the example I showed from 61511 a little bit earlier. This is a cumulative distribution function again, showing our different confidence levels at various different initiating cause frequencies. So you see likelihood here on the bottom, 1 in 10. We said that was a 95% confidence, which here matches our gold standard number. Now our FMEA result, which I haven't discussed yet, that came out to about 1 in 1,000 once we did all the math. And that's the number we assigned the 50% confidence to. And then in the Excel tool, it tells us now what is the confidence in our target of the 1 in 100, and that was landing at 82%. So it may seem like this might be a little bit optimistic, especially we're putting 70% even on 1 in 1,000. Also, the approach may sound a little subjective, and neither point's wrong. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that with the prior, it's just a starting point. Whatever you choose, you'll prove it or disprove it with the evidence you collect. The thing, though, the better the prior you start with, the faster you'll get to the true result. So to do our first update and generate our posterior our posterior distribution, we needed evidence. So the best evidence we had was straight from the operating team. We asked them how many failures have occurred in history, which we touched on earlier. The answer was 0 failures in the last 25 years. So that was our first update. So back to this graph here, the blue line is our prior distribution. The green line is our posterior, where we've applied that update, and you'll see our confidence now in the 1 in 100 number has raised up to 93%, and that sounds pretty good. Continue on here. Unfortunately, in between the time of our draft report and our final report, Murphy's Law struck, and the BPCS had a failure. Fortunately, though, the safeguard portion of the system worked as intended and detected a high pressure and safely shut down the system. Nope, looks like my slides got screwed up a little. Anyway, so unfortunately now our 0 failures in 25 years is now changes to one failure in 25 years. And we'll look here at the model that results now. Now you see with that 1 failure, our posterior distribution has dropped rather drastically. Even our confidence in that 1 in 100 failure per year number has dropped even to 22%. Which, yeah, that's not near as good as it was, but it's a pretty big drop, as you can see here. One thing to note even is 50%, the average. This system, we would only be 50% confident that the system's achieving a 1 in 38 per year, which is better than 1 in 10, but it's still not 1 in 100. So of course, this prompted the team to ask the question, now what do we do? So a key thing to remember is our particular project was a initiating cause frequency analysis. It was not a SIL calculation failure rate data assessment. So this project was actually in the world of LOPA, not in 61511. So even though we were utilizing some of the guiding principles, but IEC 61511 does require a 70% upper confidence on any failure rate data. But in LOPA, they only suggest your data be a mean value. They don't actually call out a requirement. If we do assume, though, that a 50% coin flip is a minimum target, it would take the client, as I wrote here, it would take them 52 years to get at least the 1 in 100 back up to a 50% target. So I mean, that's better than 1,000 years worth of data collection had we went with the maximum likelihood estimate route, but it's still 52 years is longer than anyone's typical career. So what do we do? Key point to note with the Bayesian analysis is it's a long run game. You're never going to arrive at your final results in one shot, and sometimes the evidence can be unlucky. and it could have been the case with this particular study. So your goal in a case like this should be to show that the trip was in the realm of possibilities of 1 in 100, and that's just the nature of random failures. You could have just landed at your first failure in 25 years instead of at 100. And we can prove that by showing a constant improvement in our model over time as we work our way toward the truth. But important to note, the prior generated from the Bayesian confidence assessment, it was the team's best judgment, but it is subjective and it could lead to a false sense of security. That's why you really need that evidence, which is your hard facts that should quickly prove or disprove your optimistic results, if they are optimistic. Unfortunately, though, with a lot of our one-off systems, as is the case here, and our limited data models, it is very easy to prove a bad result, but just have a failure or two, and you'll know pretty quickly where your system stands. But it's much more difficult to prove a good number, even with the Bayesian approach. So we would know if the client had another failure anytime soon, then it's a sure bet the system will not achieve 1 in 100 initiating cause frequency. But if their luck was just bad, it's going to take many years to recover their confidence, but it is possible. So as I said, you want to show a long run game, constant improvement over time. So that's one thing you can do. And then additionally, just because they had a low confidence assessment right now on their system due to the failure, it was kind of a blessing in disguise. This gave the team live feedback to consider. So rather than sweeping this failure under the rug or even overreacting and installing a SIL3 system and throw out their DCS completely, they had some better numbers and some better assessments with our FMEA we conducted. So the power with with Bayes is the team was able to see those impacts in real time and immediately know they needed to take action. So had they taken a different approach, like the frequentist approach, they may not have realized the problem until 1,000 years later, which obviously that's not going to work. Sorry. So now the team was ready to sharpen their pencil, get to the bottom of their failure. They initiated a root cause failure analysis to figure out how did the system fail. They did find out, and they did confirm that. As feared, one of the valves had not fully closed prior to the next step occurring, regardless of whatever our FMEA results showed. So with the result and confirmation that the system really did have a failure, and then coupled with the low confidence in the system, the team did decide they'd be uncomfortable proceeding with a 1 in 100 initiating cause frequency at this particular time. So they did decide to go the route of adding an SIS, but they did it a little differently than putting in new valves. What they ended up doing was they installed an SIS override on the DCS sequence in order to independently confirm their valve position prior to the DCS progressing to the next progressing the sequence. This way, the client prevented installing new valves, prevented adding in new failure modes that they were worried about, and they still address the risk. And a good thing is the results and the path they took was supported with our FMEA that we did, which showed that the valves failing prior to switching steps was the most likely cause of failure. So that's where they focused their efforts, and that's where the root cause analysis told them their failure was. So all in all, it did provide them good feedback. So with that wraps up our presentation. Thanks for joining me again, and I'll turn it over for questions. Okay, so someone asks, how can we use this to justify taking 2 BPCS IPL credits? So that's a good question. So this study, like I stated, was an initiating cause frequency analysis. BPCS IPLs, though, those fall under the 61511 requirements. So there are requirements in 61511, which you should strive to follow as closely as you can. But in some cases, we may not be able to follow all of those requirements. So we may, again, try to follow the requirements, but you may need to go for a deviation as we did here. And hopefully you have some sort of approved deviation form, but terms that get thrown around are like as low as reasonably practical, ALARP. You may be in a situation where you can't follow the requirements of the standard, and this is the only way that makes sense. So what I would do is very similar to what we did in this study. I would look for a way to justify or come up with an actual failure rate of the system, whether it's FMEA or some other technique, and then go for your confidence assessment the exact same way. You can use the 2 data point method discussed in NIST that was in the presentation, and if you look in the paper, you'll see it. Let's see, next question. What kind of independent auditing must be done to verify the solidity of the FMEA performed? Would that further support your 70% confidence assessment? So independent auditing, I would want buy-in at least from my management team that they would approve any of these approaches taken, and as well, you may even seek out a third-party consultant to confirm that this FMEA looks valid. It may seem like it might cost a lot of money, but at times, if you're looking at installing a new system, SIS system or something similar, with all the operations and maintenance costs and purchasing costs that go on, it may be cheaper to get that confirmation done versus purchasing a new system. Let's see here. Next question. Could this site have kept their 1 in 100 year initiating cause frequency? So we had the confidence had dropped down to the 22% after that one failure. However, it did. So I would say the answer is yes, but with proceed with caution. So I'd want to get a good handle on what all the failures are. I would want to go back and examine that LOPA closer. Just make sure the failures were very well defined, and just kind of see if maybe the scenario could be better defined and match what we actually found. And it may be the case that the way we modeled the system, maybe it could be done better with better definition. That way we're more specific on what we were trying to come up with in our initiating cause frequency. So the better definition, the better our prior could have been made, and maybe we would have found our confidence is higher, and maybe we could have shifted some of the failures that occurred into like a different into LOPA instead of into this analysis we did. I think this is a new question. How do you address the limitation of the BPCS initiating cause frequency stated in the IEC 61511 with this study? So yeah, this study again was not for failure rate, was not so it was initiating cause. It was really trying to address LOPA requirements versus 61511 requirements. But let's see if my slides are still here. So yeah, back on this slide here, I addressed it a little bit, not as in depth as I go in the paper, but basically you can't follow the standard if you're going with this deviation. It is a deviation to the standard, so you will need to have some sort of approved deviation that your management is willing to sign off on. If you do read into the standard, though, if you read the paper, I analyze the standards requirements. I go into the notes even and talk about them, but they do want you to basically have prove you have enough independence between your two DCS, be it IPLs or initiating cause frequencies. So it is a little bit of a gray area how they have it defined. If you read all the notes, part 1, part 2 of the standard. But again, in black and white, it says you can't do this unless you design your BPCS in accord with the standard. So you would have to deviate from the standard to do it. But you do need, again, management needs to buy off on it, and you need to justify it and try to keep with the intent of the standard. Well, if there are any other questions, let me go back to my slide here. Just feel free to email me, keith.brumbaugh@aesolutions.com. And of course, you can email our general info if you wanted to have any questions about us or our services. Feel free to reach out. And thank you again for joining us today.